Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the death of Saul, 1 Samuel chapter 31. Now, going back to chapter 28, there's something of a pattern here I want you to see. The Philistines had come up against Saul, sort of setting up for the battle. That was chapter 28, verses 1 through 4. And then remember, Saul went and consulted the witch of Endor, who and Samuel shows up in that seance and says, "You're going to die tomorrow." And we turn the page after chapter 28. We expect to see that, but instead there's a flashback to see the whole upcoming battle through David's eyes, and David is dismissed from the battle. He's sent back home, and he gets back home and he finds that Ziklag, his new hometown, adopted town, has been taken into captivity. So David goes with his 600, 200, he has to leave at the brook of Besor, but he rescues the captives of Ziklag. So that's a rescue story. So he's dismissed from the battle, and then he rescues the captives. And now, as we come to chapter 31, we're back with Saul, and now we're going to see Saul and his son Jonathan, and other sons as well, that will be killed in battle. And then his bodies, their bodies will be taken and put on display at the city of Bethshan. But the men of Jabesh Gilead are going to come and rescue the body of Saul. So there's a coming and a coming. We start with the Philistines coming, and we end with the men of Jabesh Gilead coming, not to go against Saul, but to rescue his body, his lifeless body, and give it a proper burial. So chapter 31, verse 1, now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. This mountain that juts out into the valley of Jezreel. This is going to be the scene of Israel's great defeat. Verse 2, the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchi-Shua, the sons of Saul. They all die upon the mountain. Verse 3, the battle went heavily against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Verse 4, then Saul said to his armor bearer, remember that fighting is always sort of a two-party thing that takes place. There is both the one who carries the weapon, but there's also the one that carries the shield, the armor. Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and pierce me through with it. Otherwise, these uncircumcised will come and pierce me through and make sport of me. He expects to get tortured, but his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. And so Saul took his sword and fell upon it. And so Saul commits suicide rather than fall into the hands of the Philistines. Verse 5, when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. So it becomes a double suicide. Verse 6, thus Saul died with his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men on that day together. It is a great and glorious defeat. Verse 7, when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley, with those who were beyond the Jordan, in other words, the news is going to get out to everyone, saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the cities and fled, and then the Philistines came and lived in them. Notice it's not just a battle where everybody goes home at the end of the day. The Israelites are dispossessed from their homes in the valley and in the cities, and the Philistines won a great victory, and then they hold on to that victory by taking hold of those cities that they have now captured. Now, a summary of Saul's career is in order here. Saul's career had started way back in chapter 9 where he had met Samuel. He'd been, remember, looking for some donkeys. He was anointed by Samuel, and then sort of a double anointing where he was anointed by Samuel, but then he is recognized in front of all Israel. This is the new king. But then not everybody had accepted that, and then in chapter 11, this is important to remember for our story here, the men of Jabesh Gilead on the east side of the Jordan had been threatened with great evil, where the king of Ammon was going to come and take their city, and they said, well, we'll surrender. The king of Ammon said, well, you can do that, but I'm going to gouge out the right eye of every man who surrenders. And it was Saul who came to the rescue, and that battle results in success with the help of God. That's chapter 11. So we have a meeting and then success in battle, but then in the following chapters we see Saul's failure, both in chapter 13, where he is supposed to wait for Samuel and he doesn't wait, and he offers a sacrifice that he really should have been waiting for that. And then in chapter 14, Saul, he puts a curse on anyone who eats until the battle is over, but the news doesn't get out to everyone. Jonathan doesn't check his Facebook messenger account. He doesn't get the text, and so Jonathan eats some honey, and Saul says, well, that's it, I have to put you to death, and Jonathan says, oh, well, and the people say, no, we can't let you do that. And so that was a scene that did not come out very strongly in Saul's favor. So that's Act 1. There's a meeting, there's a success, and there's a failure. In Act 2, that begins where in chapter 15, Saul is supposed to go and bring God's judgment against the Amalekites, and he doesn't do it completely. And Samuel meets him and says, because you did not obey God, I'm not going to go with you, and God's not going to go with you. And Saul is given a prophetic condemnation. Following this, Saul goes home, and we see now the rise of David, and Saul enjoys success at the hands of David, but he's not so happy about the song they're singing as a result of that, where they're singing Saul has slain his thousands and David has slain his 10,000s. And now Saul becomes jealous, and he fails both with David and even with Jonathan, where Saul tries to murder David and later on even tries to murder Jonathan. And so there is failure. Notice there's a meeting, and then there's success, and then there's failure. And this brings us now to Act 3. In Act 3, there's a meeting. Again, Saul meets Samuel, but this time it is in a seance. And Saul's death is foretold. And we have not success in battle following this up, but failure in battle. I suppose you could say David had success as he returned to Ziklag and he redeemed and rescued Ziklag, but Saul now has failure in battle, and he commits suicide, and there's not going to be another failure beyond this. He falls on his own sword and dies. Verse 8, it came about on the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They are all dead by now. Verse 9, they cut off his head and stripped off his weapons and sent them throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They see this as a religious war, a war that they have won. Verse 10, they put his weapons in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. So notice Bethshan is nearby. It's on the west side of the Jordan River. Let's look at a picture of that. Bethshan, now the ruins that you're seeing here date more to the Roman era, long after Saul, but it's the same place, and Saul's body is put on display at Bethshan. Verse 11, now when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead, this is the city, remember, that Saul at the beginning of his career had rescued, and they remember that. The inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, and all the valiant men rose and walked all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his son from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. This is not out of disrespect. This is to honor the fallen. Verse 13, they took their bones and they buried them under the tamarask tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. They want to give honor to the fallen Messiah. But in the next book, our eye will turn not to the fallen Messiah, but to the still living Messiah that will be King David, the anointed one of Israel, as the mantle now will turn to him, and we will see the rise of King David.